Hi everyone, welcome to Single Values. So today we're going to look at Airbnb and Doordash, and both of these are very exciting companies, big names that we've waited for such a long time. And what would you have it? They're both coming onto the market at the very same time. So we have Airbnb coming onto the market at a 35 billion valuation, and that's at a price range of $44 to $50. So that 35 will be determined on which exact price it gets. And they want to raise about $2.5 billion, whereas with DoorDash, they want to come onto the market at around about 32 billion valuation, and the price range is 75 to 85, and they want to raise about $2.8 billion. So when we look at both of these companies, surely they're in different fields, but in terms of valuation, they're coming on a very similar valuation. DoorDash at 32 and Airbnb at 35. They're on a raise similar amount of money. We'll look at the revenues, and then that probably might just help us, come to a conclusion of how things are. So revenues, this is DoorDash. DoorDash revenues was 291 million in 2018 to 885 million in 2019. So really impressive growth numbers there. And in 2019, for the 9 months, it was 587. And in for 2020, they managed to increase that to $1.9 billion, which is pretty incredible. Like, to grow those numbers by that much is just incredible. Like, year after year, not even like just for 1 years of growth. Like, from 2018, growing those small revenues to the larger revenues is always easier, but 2019 to 2020, that is really impressive. So in the last 2 years, they've managed to grow from 291 million to 1.9 billion, and that's just for the 9 months. We probably expect closer to 2.5 billion by the time 2020 is finished, which would be an incredible run rate for DoorDash. Like, this is a company that's it takes about 45 to 50% of the US market share, so it's really good at what it does in terms of expanding, and it's even beating Uber. Like, if you beat Uber at its own market, I think you're doing something really well. So yeah, I think this company is definitely on my radar. Of course, if something gets too large, the big question is, can you continue to expand? And the question here is, it's a valid one, and I believe the answer is a definite yes, because the food delivery market is continuing to grow year after year as more people change from buying, going to the actual shop themselves to actually just staying at home and getting delivery, because I guess it's one of those things that you just have to get yourself used to. But there is an increased cost that originally people were not that interested in paying more for delivery, but now that they're really onto it, and like as the revenues kind of show, it's becoming a very big and increasing trend as we go. And if we look at this article here, the total addressable market in 2017 was about $260 billion. That grew to 325 in 2020. Though that could be larger because this year has just really been phenomenal for a company like this. And as you kind of saw, the revenues going from over 500 million to 1.9. So that's really incredible. And then by 2025, they expect to grow to $470 billion. So you can kind of see that this is a sector that just continues to grow. And I think DoorDash has a huge potential, particularly as the market continues to grow. And, if this is kind of like a rising tide, all things just kind of just go together. And I think this company, along with many others, will continue to do well. And it's also a sector that's consolidating quite heavily. So if we kind of look in 2019, they acquired Caviar from Square for $410 million. So originally Caviar was also one of the bigger players as well. Not as big as the rest, but still fairly big. And then you had, Uber Eats acquired Postmates for $2.4 billion, and you had Just Eat Takeaway acquire Grubhub for $7.1 billion. So you can kind of see, like, this sector, as it gets bigger, it's consolidating. And as it's kind of put, like when there's too much competition, there's no margins to be gained. But as all these big players consolidate and they own different markets, they kind of work out a nice kind of agreement in a way by consensus, that hey, you operate in your market, I'll operate in my market, and we can both charge good rates that we both become profitable companies. And that's the thing. The minute DoorDash can, operate in a way that they don't have to compete so heavily, they don't have to give so many promotions and free deliveries and whatnot, they will become a profitable company as they go on. So they started in 2013, and they're based in San Francisco, California. And yeah, for delivery, their revenue was in 2017. Okay, these numbers seem kind of weird. I don't think they correlate with these ones here. Yeah, so we might just negate these numbers. But yeah, in terms of valuation, it went from $500 million in 2015 to $7 billion in 2018, and then to $13 billion a year later in 2019, and then $16 billion in 2020. But as you kind of saw, they're looking at a $32 billion basically this year, because the growth in the business has been so strong. They've managed to double the valuation. But of course, private valuations are always lower than public valuations, because private investors want much more for their return, whereas public investors are pretty happy to just beat the bank. So hence why the valuation tends to be higher in a public valuation. And also the numbers have proven, just kind of boosts that up. So at a 32 billion valuation, it is on the pricier side. Like, but just looking at the numbers, that they are looking at 2.5 billion in revenue. So on a 10x basis, you would expect it to be more of a 25 billion company rather than 32. But of course, there's a slight premium that they want. And that's probably fair. Like, the company is growing at a substantial rate, that if you buy it at 32 and say like next year it's worth 40, then it kind of makes that justification. But of course, the return might not be as high. If you go like, I'm buying today and I get like a 20 to 30 increase on my investment for 12 months, then that's the big question. Would you find that worth it? And that's a big question for you, isn't it? Whereas, like if we look at Airbnb and make that comparison, it probably makes it easier for you to decide. Makes it easier for me to decide when I comparisons as well. So if we look at our Airbnb, you can kind of see revenue has grown really, really well, from 900 million to 1.6 to 2.5 to 3.6 in 2018, then 4.8 in 2019. The growth rate isn't as quick for Airbnb. Rather, with DoorDash, it's extremely quick, so hence why DoorDash gets slight premium. And then also we look at 2020, and revenues actually dropped for Airbnb. But of course, we know this year was a disadvantage to Airbnb and an advantage to DoorDash. So that's also one thing you want to consider, that DoorDash has an advantage this year in its numbers, and next year it might not have that advantage, whereas Airbnb has a disadvantage this year, and next year it has an advantage when everyone wants to just go traveling all the time. So, it's one of those things you want to consider, that, hey, this year's been great for DoorDash, whereas this year's been horrible for Airbnb. Yet Airbnb still did fairly well, and DoorDash did extremely well. If we look at like statistics, actually, I'll show you this one instead, actually. That for listings, 2012, they had 120,000 listings, and then it rose to 300,000, then 800,000, then 1.2 million in 2015, 2.1 in 2016, 4 million in 2017, 6 million in 2018, 7 million listings in 2019. And you can kind of see, like, as they've continued to operate, they've just continued to grow in size. And also, Airbnb is also a world-renowned, name. whereas DoorDash, not the whole world. The whole world does not currently use DoorDash, whereas the whole world can currently use Airbnb. So in terms of growth, there's a much easier path for growth for Airbnb, whereas DoorDash, the market is very, very competitive. Whereas for Airbnb, they basically link up with homeowners, and homeowners can just rent out their homes and use that as a platform. And if you're the most well-known one, then it makes you even more popular. And if you're a homeowner and you're thinking, I want to lease my rooms out for a couple of days in a week, you're going to think of the name that comes to your head, and that's Airbnb. So I think that gives them a huge advantage. Whereas with DoorDash, they're not in every country in the world, so when you want to get deliveries, you're probably not thinking, I need to do DoorDash. And I think because they've got cemented such a large market already in the US, the growth can only be as quick as the market continues to grow, because it's unlikely DoorDash is going to secure 100% of the market, because at the end of the day, Uber Eats is going to be a big, big competitor, and I don't see DoorDash going, to 70%. Like, it's possible they might go to 60%, but I don't think they can get that much larger as they go. I think they can grow as long as the market grows, and that's one thing that you want to consider as well. So Airbnb revenues, that basically in 2014 it was 23 million. In 2015 it was 900 million, and then you can kind of see, like, in the years preceding, in 2019 it was 4.7. So from 2014 to 2019 they kind of 10x their revenues, and that kind of shows how much traction they continue to get. They get that consistency as they go. Of course, this year was just not their year, and it also means you're able to buy Airbnb at a cheaper valuation, because you don't have to pay a premium based on this year's decline in growth. Whereas with DoorDash, you kind of have to pay the extra premium because this year the numbers are a bit better than most people expect. So that's one thing. Like, DoorDash, extremely good numbers, extremely good year. Airbnb, horrible year, okay numbers. But next year, you expect Airbnb to actually outperform their current numbers, and DoorDash, they will continue to perform well. But of course, I don't think they'll continue to, go into these growth numbers. But I assume they'll still be extremely good growth. Because the delivery trend is just continuing to grow year after year. Of course, this year definitely accelerated the mindset around delivery, and how much more convenient and, in a way, safer in some sense that it is. Of course, it is more expensive, whereas for Airbnb, they just take a little cut off revenue that most people with houses probably don't mind paying, because it's 20% out of, say, like, every time you rent a room, and for every $100 only take a couple of percent, which is like, in a way, not too bad. Oh, actually, I think I should revise that. They do take a smaller, like, not a couple of percent. They did have a part where they explain these numbers. So here's the part. So out of the $100, they take $3 for the hosting fee, and then for the guests, if it's $100, there's a $4 tax, so it actually amounts to $116 for the guests, and the hosts actually only gets 97 out of the $100. So yes, they, in a way, it is only a couple of percent to the guests. But for the host, it's a bit more. And Airbnb, in providing this service, they get about $15, the 12 here and the 3 here, whereas the $4 for tax, they do not get to keep. So if we kind of look at it in this sense, $15, and it's just split between the host and the guests, which kind of is a nice way to do it. To be honest, I would actually split it more evenly. make the host pay a little bit more and make the guest pay a little bit less. So if you can kind of like meet halfway between that fee for the guest and the host, it kind of helps the demand and supply side. Whereas, with the host, they're willing to, like $3 isn't too much in terms of $100 you'd get, and for the guests, $16 out of that 100 seems quite a bit aggressive. Though, I guess that's, if they figure that's working and they figure guests are willing to pay more than the host, because if you say, like, if you charge the host a bit too much in expenses, potentially the host might be put off by that. So I guess maybe they've got that rationale of, hey, maybe we don't charge the host that much because we want their listings to be on here. The more listings we have, the better our platform goes. And whereas guests will go where more listings are. Same with DoorDash. The more restaurants DoorDash can sign up, the more people want to use their platform, because there's always some foods that you always want to go for, and if they're only on this platform, you're only going to go on this platform. So that's kind of one thing. Whereas, like, if I look at the valuation and I go Airbnb 35, DoorDash 32, I can kind of see Airbnb going to that 70 to 80 billion valuation next year. Whereas for DoorDash, like, I could see them going 40 billion valuation. So, like, I see Airbnb, even though their growth rate is a lot less, they have a much stronger moat in what they do. They are more recognized in what they do, and they can continue to sell more goods on your website, because Airbnb can do the accommodation, they can do rentals, and now they're going into activities as well. And that's kind of like this whole, they've got many areas to bridge and grow their revenues, and it kind of offers this really stable and lower risk base. Whereas with DoorDash, like, it's a competitive environment. The valuation is a bit higher than I would, want to pay, and just, for those numbers, especially taking into how competitive the market is. Of course, the growth rates are extremely good. Like, the growth rates are, like, they are fantastic. That, when I saw the numbers, I was like, how are they pulling these numbers? But, I do have to go back to the competitive advantages, and I do like Airbnb more because of those competitive advantages, even though the growth rate is much better on DoorDash. I'd say if you had to pick one, I'd pick Airbnb, and I'd hold it for a long run, and I think you'd just do well out of it. But that's based on the 35 valuation, and DoorDash is 32 billion valuation. Of course, if the market opens these at much higher than the current numbers, then we'd have to reassess it, of course. But if I look at the current numbers, I'm going with Airbnb. Whereas with DoorDash, I still like the company, but I don't believe they have as good of a competitive advantage as Airbnb does, especially when it comes to a moat. The bigger DoorDash kind of grows, the stronger it gets, but it doesn't mean that new competitors can't come into your local area and start eating their market share if they start to lose focus in what they do. Whereas with Airbnb, at least as they continue to grow, it continues to cement their position, because when people think of a place that they want to rent a room from, they want to go for the one that they know, the one that has kind of built this framework of trust and reliability over time. So yeah, like, that's what I think. Let me know what you think, because they're definitely very interesting, very big name IPOs, and it's still happening at the same time. So it's a joy to watch, and it's a nice exercise for me personally, just to make these comparisons. Of course, you can always buy both and see how they end up based on the valuations, of course, if you believe in both. For me, if I had to choose, I'd just pick Airbnb. Like, if Airbnb opened at too high of pricing, then I may consider DoorDash. Like, both are decent companies in the outright. Yeah, until then, good luck investing.